Midnight. Heavy knocks shook the door of the cabin near Red Hollow. 12-year-old Emily Carter froze. Outside, 40 Cheyenne warriors stood silent beneath the stars, faces painted, spears in hand. Then one stepped forward, tall, solemn, eyes full of memory. He knelt. One by one, the others followed. No words, no threats, only silence. Emily stared through the cracks, heart racing. Not fear. Something deeper. Something forgotten calling her home. The days bled together like twilight into dusk, each one indistinguishable from the last. For 3 years, Emily Carter had lived alone in the crooked cabin at the edge of Red Hollow, where the trees grew thick and the river whispered secrets only she could hear. She was 9 when it happened. Fever took her adoptive mother, quiet and sudden. The woman who'd taught her to fish, to kneel in prayer, to brush her hair before sleep. Gone within a week. Emily had held her hand until the skin cooled and stiffened, and then she'd buried her beneath the sycamore tree, wrapped in a quilt of faded reds and browns. 2 weeks later, her father left. He didn't say goodbye. He simply saddled the mule one morning and rode into the woods, saying he had something to fix. He never came back. She waited for months. At first, she left the lantern burning every night. Then only on Sundays. Then not at all. What remained was the cabin. Warped boards, a leaking roof patched with canvas, a fireplace that smoked when the wind turned, a line of nails where her mother's apron used to hang, a single Bible, pages worn soft by fingers long dead, a knife too dull for hunting, and traps too rusted to spring. Emily did what children aren't supposed to do. She endured. She learned which roots wouldn't poison her, learned to fish with her bare hands in shallow water, to gather berries before the birds got them, to split logs that weighed more than she did. Her fingers grew calloused. Her voice grew quiet. No one came. No one knew. Red Hollow wasn't a town, just a name folks used when passing through. The real towns were miles away, and Emily hadn't dared return. The sheriff had taken no interest in her when Ma died, and the preacher had only offered prayer. They didn't want a stray mouth to feed. They didn't want trouble. So she gave them none. Sometimes she thought of her old life before the Carters took her in. Cold beds, colder hands, the hard stone floor of the orphan house. A name scratched onto a ledger. Emily. No middle, no past. But she'd found something close to family with the Carters. Ma's hands smelled of pine soap. Pa's voice had been low and kind when he read aloud at night. They had tried. That's what mattered. Now they were gone. Emily kept to herself, spoke to the trees when loneliness pressed too hard against her ribs, sang hymns softly while walking to the river, though her voice cracked with disuse. She built her own snares. Once, she trapped a fox, then let it go when she saw its eyes were cloudy with age. She didn't like causing pain. She didn't dream of rescue. She just wanted to survive the next frost, the next thunderstorm, the next night alone. Sometimes, when the moon was full, she thought she saw shadows in the trees, faces that vanished when she turned to look. Once, she found a bundle of corn laid near her doorstep, wrapped in birch bark. She hadn't touched it. Another time, feathers arranged in a pattern circled her garden. She burned them. She feared drawing notice. She feared becoming someone's reason for anger. Then came the winter when her coat tore and her boots split. She spent weeks limping through snow, her feet wrapped in rags, frost biting at her toes. She carved a spoon from cedar, then lost it in a snowdrift. She went 3 days without food once, and the hunger made her dizzy, made her whisper to ghosts. And still she endured. In the quiet, she learned to watch. The sky told her when rain would come. The way birds went silent told her when something worse was near. She began to read the land like others read books. When to hide, when to move, where to find warmth when firewood was wet. She wrapped herself in silence and became part of the earth that had forgotten her. She didn't blame the world for what it took, but she didn't forgive it either. Then, on her 12th birthday, she carved her name into the doorframe. 3 letters already fading, carved years ago by someone else's hand. Her hand now, her mark, her proof she was still here. She sat by the fire that night, chewing dry rabbit meat, when a wind rose, not loud but strange. It stirred the ashes in the hearth and whispered through the chinks in the walls. She looked out the window and saw nothing but dark trees and stars that blinked like watching eyes. She pulled the blanket tighter and tried not to remember the smell of her mother's soap, or the sound of her father's voice saying her name. That night she didn't dream, but something deep inside her stirred, like a drum too far to hear clearly. Something was changing, and it was coming closer. The river wasn't just water to Emily. It was memory. It was sound in a silent life. It was the only thing that moved when everything else around her stood still. She went there often, not because she needed to, but because something inside her ached when she stayed away too long. That morning, she walked the narrow trail in silence. The air hung thick with heat, but the trees stood motionless, as if holding their breath. Summer was old and tired. No rain in weeks. Even the birds had fallen quiet. Emily's feet were wrapped in cloth, barely holding out against the roots and rocks. Her dress, patched too many times to remember, clung damply to her legs. A thin layer of sweat salted her brow. In one hand she carried her tin bucket, in the other her father's old belt knife, long since dulled, but still sharp enough to scare off raccoons. The river shimmered ahead, breaking through the trees with silver light and murmuring like an old friend. She crouched on the embankment to fill her bucket. Then she heard it. Not the river's voice, not the call of a bird. A human sound. A child's cry. Faint, ragged, too soft to be from anger, too broken to be from play. Emily froze, came again closer to a whimper now. She rose slowly, turned her head, and scanned the bend where the current grew fast and the stones rose sharp from the shallows. Then she saw him, a boy, across the river, small, soaked, shaking. She crept forward, heart pounding, breath caught behind her ribs. Branches scratched her arms, but she barely felt them. The boy stood on the far bank, one arm wrapped around a sapling for balance. His face was bruised. His hair clung to his forehead. Blood smeared the side of his leg. His other hand hung limp at his side. He tried to take a step, collapsed. The cry he made was low, wounded. Not loud enough to summon help, not strong enough to be heard again. He raised his head and saw her. They stared across the distance. Then he spoke, just one or two words, a language she didn't know, maybe Cheyenne, maybe something older. She had no idea, but it didn't matter. She heard what he meant. Help me. Emily looked at the river. It was narrower here but fast, angry from the rains. The bottom was slick, the rocks treacherous. The current roared like something alive, waiting to pull her under. But there was no one else. She stepped into the water. Cold slammed into her like a fist. She gasped, almost dropped the bucket. The current yanked at her knees. She gritted her teeth and moved, slow and steady, eyes never leaving the boy. Halfway across, a submerged rock caught her foot. She fell hard into the water, swallowed a mouthful, kicked up in panic, and broke the surface coughing. Her limbs shook. Her teeth clacked. The boy reached for her, though he couldn't stand. She reached him. The bank tore at her knees. She scrambled up beside him and pulled him close. His skin burned with fever. His lips were dry, cracked, and murmuring. He sagged into her arms. She took him back into the water. It was harder now. His weight, though small, dragged against her every step. His pain made him tremble, made her hold tighter. She stumbled once, nearly dropped him. She couldn't feel her legs. The river tried to take them both, but they made it. When her feet touched the muddy bank, she collapsed, half carrying, half dragging him up the slope. Her arms were numb. Her head swam. She didn't stop. She didn't speak. She just moved. The cabin door stood open. She hadn't locked it in weeks. Inside, she lowered him to her cot. The room was too dark. She stoked the fire, boiled water, tore strips from her sheet. The boy drifted in and out. Once he opened his eyes and looked at her, reached out, fingers trembling, and touched her braid. Then his hand dropped. His leg was bad. The bone had not broken the skin, but it bulged beneath it. She thought of the deer she had once seen with a crooked leg. It hadn't lasted long. She splinted his limb with sticks and twine. He moaned when she straightened it. She whispered soft apologies, not knowing if he heard. She cleaned his cuts with boiled moss water and applied pine sap to stop the bleeding. She sat beside him all night. Just before dawn, he stirred. He reached toward his neck, fingers brushing the pendant hanging there. Then he looked at her. "Home," he whispered. One of the few words she understood. Then he slept. When she woke again, the bed was empty. Emily woke to silence. The fire had burned down to embers, and the gray light of dawn was filtering through the cracks in the cabin walls. She sat up, her muscles stiff, heart pounding with the sudden, irrational fear that something had gone terribly wrong. The cot was empty. The blanket had been folded neatly. The boy was gone. She scrambled to her feet, ran to the door, and flung it open. Cold air rushed in. Mist clung low to the ground, thick and silver, blurring the shapes of trees and rocks. She stepped outside, barefoot and breathless, her eyes scanning the woods for any sign of him. Nothing moved. No sound. No voice. But then footprints. Small, uneven, dragging slightly at the heel. They led from her cabin down toward the riverbank. She followed them quickly, her breath clouding the air, her mind racing. Why had he left? Was he strong enough to walk? She reached the bank. The footprints ended at the water's edge. She scanned the other side. No prints there. No sign he had crossed. Just silence. Emily's heart dropped into her stomach. The current still ran swift, though calmer than yesterday. Had he gone into the water? Been taken? Fled? But there was no drag mark, no blood, no broken branches. It was as if the boy had simply vanished, swallowed by the river or lifted by the trees. She stood for a long time listening, not calling. She didn't know his name, didn't even know his words, but she had carried him from the current, nursed him through a fever, heard him whisper in his sleep. She knew him. Even in silence, she had known him. And now he was gone. She turned slowly and walked back to the cabin. She kept expecting to hear a voice behind her, to see him waiting on the trail, waving or smiling. But there was only the soft whisper of leaves and the creak of branches shifting in the morning wind. Then she saw it. Something small and glinting on the hearthstone. She knelt. It was the pendant, the one that had hung around his neck. She remembered it clearly, copper, round, simple. It had pressed against her collarbone as she carried him, its warmth standing out against the cold river water. She hadn't thought about it since, too focused on the wounds, the splint, the fever. But now it lay before her, carefully placed, as though offered. She picked it up gently. The cord was made of braided sinew, worn soft from time. The pendant itself was warm in her palm, despite the cold morning air. Not from the fire, it hadn't been near the flame. It was warm like something alive. Etched into the metal were symbols. Spirals, small sun-like shapes, and narrow arrows pointing inward. She didn't recognize any of it, but the marks weren't random. They told a story, just not one she knew how to read. She stared at it for a long moment, then slipped the cord over her head. The weight of it settled just below her collarbones, right above her heart. She stood slowly. This wasn't a gift left by mistake. The boy had left it for her. A thank you, a sign, a way to be remembered. Maybe more than that, maybe a bond. She looked around the room. Everything looked the same. Rough wooden walls, ashes in the hearth, a half-split log by the door. But she had changed. 3 years she'd survived in silence, waiting, enduring, vanishing inside herself. And then, in a single day, she had saved someone. Not just from injury, but from death. She had chosen to risk the current. She had pulled him across stone and water and fear. She had held his life in her hands and guarded it through the night. Now the boy was gone, but something remained. She stepped outside again, the pendant warm against her chest. The mist had begun to lift. Sunlight broke through the trees, scattering the ground with gold. She didn't know what the pendant meant, but she knew this. She had been seen. Not as a stray, not as a burden, not as a ghost surviving at the edge of the world, but as something more, person who mattered, a person who chose kindness when no one else could. She reached up and held the pendant tight in her hand. Somewhere out there, the boy was moving again. Alive, breathing, safe. And somehow Emily knew this wasn't the end of the story. Not for him, and not for her. The morning air was sharp with the scent of pine and ash. Mist still drifted low over the ground, and the river whispered softly behind the cabin. Emily stood outside, her arms wrapped around herself, the copper pendant warm against her chest. She hadn't slept much since the boy, Toma, vanished. Though no words had passed between them that she fully understood, something inside her had shifted. She was no longer just surviving. For the first time in years, she had chosen someone else over her fear. She saved him, and it changed everything. She didn't expect what happened next. It began with silence. Not the usual kind that wrapped around the woods in the early hours, but a deeper silence, as if the forest itself had paused. Then came the soft thunder of hooves. She heard them long before she saw them. 40 riders emerged through the trees in a perfect line. Cheyenne warriors, every one of them painted and proud, their faces marked with sun, earth, and wind. They made no noise beyond the slow clop of their horses and the occasional creak of leather. The forest didn't disturb them. At their center walked a man, unmounted, tall and straight-backed. His braids were streaked with gray, and red paint marked the bones of his face. His chest was bare except for a long string of beads and feathers. His eyes were dark and fixed on her. He stopped at the edge of her clearing. Emily stood still, heart hammering, but not with fear. The man stepped forward and set a folded blanket at her feet, hers washed and mended. Then he spoke, his voice like the sound of a slow river over stone. "I am Iron Elk, father of the boy you saved." Emily swallowed. Her fingers clutched the pendant around her neck. She nodded once, not trusting her voice. Iron Elk looked down, then knelt before her. Slowly, deliberately, and behind him, one by one, the warriors dismounted and followed his lead. Within moments, every man kneeled in a wide arc around her cabin. None of them spoke. None moved. It was not a gesture of surrender. It was reverence. Emily's throat tightened. No one had bowed to her before. No one had even noticed. Then, from the circle, a smaller figure stepped forward. Toma. He leaned slightly on a carved walking stick, his legs still healing, but he walked without help. His face lit with recognition when he saw her, and for a second, the fear and weight of the world lifted from Emily's shoulders. He carried something in his hand. Another pendant, nearly identical to hers, the copper warm and polished, etched with the same spirals and sunlines. He stepped forward, held it out. She reached for it with both hands. Their fingers brushed. Toma said nothing, only looked into her eyes and smiled. Then Iron Elk rose. "You risked yourself," he said quietly. "You braved a river that many warriors will not cross. You did not know us, yet you helped my son. You asked for nothing. You gave him everything." He untied a strip of red cloth from his belt, bright, embroidered with black thread. He walked to her door and tied it to the post. "This marks your home. Any who see it will know you are watched. You are protected." Emily's eyes blurred. She wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, embarrassed by the tears she hadn't expected. She looked at Toma. "What's his name?" she whispered. Iron Elk answered. "Toma. It means he who returns." The boy smiled wider, proud. Emily looked around at the warriors, at their painted faces and solemn eyes. They weren't here to scare her. They weren't even here to thank her, not really. They were here because something had been restored. A bond. A history. A girl once stolen, perhaps. A child once left behind. Now remembered. Now claimed. The wind picked up and rustled the trees. Iron Elk spoke once more. "You carry a name not yet spoken, but it will be." He placed his hand over his heart. Then, without ceremony, the warriors rose, mounted their horses, and turned back to the trees. Toma lingered for a moment. He placed his hand gently on her arm. Then he turned and followed. Within minutes they were gone. Only the red cloth fluttered on her doorframe, and the weight of the second pendant hung warm and steady in her hand. The sun had just broken the edge of the trees when Emily saw it, thin black smoke rising from the west. Not campfire smoke. Not the warm curl of cooking fires or the pale drift of incense. This was thick, dark, violent. It climbed fast and straight into the sky, too heavy for the breeze to carry away. She stood at the edge of the clearing, frozen. A chill ran through her, though the morning was warm. Then running feet. Toma crashed through the brush, breathless. His staff discarded somewhere behind him. His eyes were wild with panic. He didn't stop to explain. He grabbed her hand and pulled. Emily dropped the basket in her arm and followed. They ran. Through pine, over root, across creek beds gone dry in the heat. The air thickened with smoke as they crested the last ridge. And then the world broke open. Below them, the Cheyenne village lay in ruin. Lodges collapsed in smoldering heaps. Ash danced in the air like snow. Half-burned baskets and shattered pots lay scattered across the trampled grass. Chickens clucked weakly, wandering between the ruins. A cow lay on its side, foam around its mouth. The central fire pit had been overturned. Its coals spread wide and cold. And everywhere sickness. People knelt near the wells, retching. Women held moaning children who couldn't open their eyes. A healer crouched beside a boy no older than 5. His lips cracked and dry, his chest barely rising. And among it all walked strangers. Gunmen, white men, at least a dozen, dressed in trail dust and rough coats. Some wore faded tin stars pinned to their chests. Others carried no badge, only rifles. They moved slowly like men used to power. Their eyes were hard. Their boots crushed the grass like it was already theirs. At the center of it all stood Iron Elk. Bound at the wrists, blood on his face. But he was standing, proud, unbent. A man faced him. A tall man with a heavy coat, gray at the edges, and a broad-brimmed black hat. He leaned on a carved cane and spoke with the air of someone who didn't fear the weight of his own voice. Samuel Briggs. Emily knew the name. Everyone did. He was a man who claimed what he wanted and buried what resisted. He owned judges, bought off lawmen, ran fences through old trails and towns alike. Whole families had vanished after crossing him. And now, here he was in the heart of what had been safe. She didn't know how he'd found her, but she knew, as he turned slowly and looked straight up the ridge at her, that he had. He raised his hand and pointed. 2 gunmen peeled off and began to climb the ridge. Toma yanked her back into the trees. They dropped behind a fallen trunk as footsteps thudded closer. The smell of leather and gunpowder reached her nose. One voice said, "She's up here. Saw her." "Wait," the other answered. "Briggs said she comes down on her own." A pause. Then the boots retreated. They waited long minutes before Emily lifted her head again. The men had returned to the village center. Briggs was shouting now, his voice clear even from this distance. "This ends now," he called. "You shelter a girl that don't belong here." He raised a folded paper in one hand and waved it above his head. "She's property, promised by blood, signed by hand. Her mother owed, and I was paid." A murmur passed through the crowd of wounded and fearful villagers. "She don't belong to you," someone called. Briggs laughed, loud and cruel. "Everything here belongs to me. I've got the deed to half this valley, and the rest will come when the courts wake up. You think your word stands up to mine?" Then he raised a canteen high. "This here's from your south well." He uncapped it, poured it into the dust. The water hissed, and the grass where it fell curled black and died. "You'll get no crops, no medicine, nothing." He turned slowly, pointing up toward the tree-line where Emily watched unseen. "You hear me, girl? You come to me or they pay." He mounted his horse, slow and easy. "You've got 3 days." And with that he rode off. His men followed. No shots fired. But the damage had already been done. That night, Emily stood beside the last burning ember in the village circle. Around her, children moaned in sleep. Women whispered songs without melody. The air hung thick with ash and grief. Iron Elk sat opposite her, unbound, but the rawhide burns still marked his wrists. He looked at her not with demand, but with sorrow. "You were taken," he said, voice low. She nodded slowly. "Your mother was my sister. Her name was Morning Star. Your father, Tall Ash. The night you vanished, the sky was clear. No warning. Raiders came fast. Soldiers. Men without flag. They burned the edge tents. Killed your father in his sleep. Your mother tried to run with you." He paused. "She made it as far as the river." Emily closed her eyes. "She hid you there, beneath reeds. When we found her, she was already gone. But you were not there." Silence stretched between them. Emily whispered, "I was told I was found. No name. No story." He nodded. "That was true. But Briggs." Iron Elk's mouth hardened. "He claims he bought you, paid a debt, produced a paper no court questioned. He unrolled it. A false deed, marked with flourishes and lies. It named her, Emily Carter, as property orphaned from birth, granted to Briggs's family as payment. It bore seals, fake names, real signatures. Many have tried to challenge it," Iron Elk said. "All disappeared." Emily looked at the sick children around her, at the burned food, at the twisted grass. "He did this," she said, "to force me back." Iron Elk nodded. "He fears what you are." She looked down at the pendant still warm on her chest. Toma sat beside her, quiet. "He wants to erase you," the boy said. "Erase your name, your blood." She shook her head. "No." She stood slowly. "I'll go to him." Toma flinched. "You can't." "I won't surrender," she said. "But I'll face him. On my terms." Iron Elk rose. "Then we stand with you." But she shook her head. "Not yet. Let him believe I'm alone." She stepped into the center of the village. The people, wounded and weary, turned toward her. "I'm not Emily Carter," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "I am Anna Starling." And for the first time she claimed her name. Dawn broke pale and sharp on the third day. Emily stood alone at the edge of the ruined village, a shawl draped over her shoulders and the copper pendant resting just above her heart. The wind tugged gently at the red cloth still tied to her door, the symbol of protection and kinship. But today she walked without it. Behind her, the Cheyenne watched from the shadows of trees and hollowed shelters. Toma stood among them, face pale but eyes bright, one hand clenched around his walking stick. Iron Elk had argued. They all had. But Emily had insisted. She would go alone. If Briggs thought her defenseless, he'd lower his guard. And that would be the moment truth could cut deeper than any blade. She stepped into the open clearing at the edge of the trail. Briggs and his men were already waiting. 12 of them, mounted and grim. They looked like wolves come to circle a wounded deer. Dust clung to their coats. The barrels of their rifles caught the early light. Briggs sat tall atop his black mare, the reins loose in his hands. He wore a tailored gray coat, a polished rifle slung across his back, and a smile like he'd already won. "Well now," he called as she approached. "Didn't think you'd come walking so easy." Emily stopped 10 paces away. "I didn't come to beg." Briggs laughed, loud and sure. "You came to end this. That's what I like about you. Always did have fire. Just needed it pointed the right way." "You poison children," Emily said quietly. He shrugged. "No different than a siege. Block the food, dry the wells, squeeze the neck till someone talks. You call that justice? I call it the future. Mine. And yours if you're smart." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document, the same false deed. "You come with me, this paper gets signed. Territory courts won't blink. I'll put you in a fine house. Education. Proper name. No more pretending you're someone you're not." "I'm not pretending." "Of course you are," Briggs said. "You think those people behind you care who you are? Your leverage. That's it." Emily's voice stayed even. "If I'm leverage, why are your men sweating?" He stiffened. "Look at them," she said. Your hands are twitching. Your horses are nervous. Because you know something's wrong. You feel it. Briggs glanced around. His men shifted uneasily in their saddles. I know what you did, Emily said. To the wells. The water you poisoned, it's not just killing them. It's killing your men. Briggs's face darkened. One of them collapsed yesterday, she said, nodding toward the smallest rider. His skin turned white, couldn't hold his food down. You thought it was sunstroke. She stepped closer. It wasn't. Briggs's eyes narrowed. Lies. It's the same water. The streams feed both sides of the valley. You don't own the river. You can't control where poison flows. A murmur ran through the men. Briggs turned sharply. Shut it down. All of you. She's bluffing. Check their eyes, Emily said. Check their hands. Look at the veins. It's already started. The rider to Briggs's left shifted uneasily. His hand rose, almost unconsciously, to wipe sweat from his brow. Briggs saw it, and for the first time he looked afraid. You think you've got some power here, he growled. I don't need power, she said. I have truth. She reached into her shawl and pulled out the matching pendant, the one Toma had given her. She held it up so all could see. This belonged to the boy I saved. He gave it freely, not from debt, not from pity, but from honor. She dropped it into the dust at her feet. Then she knelt beside it, slowly, not in remembrance. And from the trees, one by one, they emerged. Cheyenne warriors stepped forward from the shadows. 30, maybe more, bowstrung, rifles ready. They had circled the glade at dawn. Silent, patient. Briggs's men turned in panic. They were surrounded. Iron Elk stepped forward last, voice low and steady. No more lies, Samuel Briggs. No more paper. No more poison. Briggs turned his rifle slightly, hand shaking. You fire that, Iron Elk said. And your blood's the first to fall. The silence was so complete that even the wind stopped. Emily rose. You can choose mercy, she said to Briggs. He looked at her. What do you know about mercy? I know it's stronger than fear, that it ends things. Briggs didn't move. His men looked to one another, uncertain. Then one dropped his rifle. Another followed. Within seconds, all weapons hit the dust. Briggs stood alone. He looked at Emily. This girl he had tried to buy, break, erase, and saw something he hadn't expected. Unshakable, unowned. He turned his horse slowly and rode away. No one followed. Emily stood still, the wind rising around her, lifting the shawl like wings. And behind her, the land began to breathe again. Smoke no longer rose from the valley. Not from fire, not from war. Only the gentle plumes of cook fires, their breath curling skyward like prayers in the evening light. The land, though wounded, had begun to heal. Emily sat beside the fire in the heart of the Cheyenne camp. Now rebuilt, not as it had been, but as something new. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the distant creek. Toma knelt across from her, shaping a small bowstring with steady fingers. His limp had faded, replaced by quiet confidence. A boy no longer afraid to speak. Iron Elk sat nearby, skin bronze in the firelight, braiding rope from long strands of horsehair. He hadn't spoken much since Briggs fled the valley, but his silence was not heavy. It was thoughtful, restful, like a man who had seen what he feared most and watched it pass without swallowing him whole. The tribe had not celebrated with shouting or drums. Their joy had no loudness. It moved in touches, in food shared without ceremony, in shoulders that no longer tensed at every sound. The red cloth still fluttered over Emily's cabin. Its corners frayed now, sun-faded, but no one dared take it down, because it still meant something. Toma handed her the finished bowstring, and she smiled. Strong, she said. He grinned and nodded. Like you. She shook her head. I wasn't strong. Yes, he said, but not like fire, like the earth, quiet, but unbreakable. She looked at the pendant resting against her chest, the one the boy had left behind that first night. The second one, Toma's gift, hung beside it now, both swaying together as she breathed. They no longer felt like foreign things. They felt like roots. Iron Elk finally spoke. "My sister," he said, eyes still on the rope in his hands. "Would have been proud." Emily didn't answer at first. Her throat tightened too quickly. She only looked into the fire. "I don't remember her," she whispered. "I do," he said. She laughed like wind in tall grass, fierce in anger, gentle in sorrow. "When you were born, she held you like a warrior holds a blade, with awe." Emily closed her eyes. "I wish I'd known her." "You will," Iron Elk said. "In time, in story, in the faces of those who carry her blood." She looked at him. "Is that who I am now?" He met her gaze. "You are who you choose to be. But your name, Anna Starling, is true. It was hers. It is yours." She nodded slowly. "Anna." It didn't feel strange anymore. It felt like something she had always known, waiting to be remembered. As dusk settled, the wind shifted. A young girl approached, tugging gently on Emily's sleeve. In her hands she held a carved figure, a bird with outstretched wings. "I made it," the girl said, shy. "For me." The girl nodded. Emily took the figure and turned it in her hands. The wings were wide and strong, the lines delicate, the shape of a starling. She looked up, but the girl had already skipped away. Toma leaned closer, pointing at the bird. "It flies in storms," he said. "Never hides." Emily ran her thumb along the smooth wings. "Like us." He nodded. They sat in silence then, as the last of the fire turned to embers. There were still scars in the valley, burned trees, empty graves, pain that would not vanish with one act of justice. But there was also peace, a peace not born from force, but from truth, hard-earned, real. And in that peace Anna, found her place, not in stories others told her, but in the story she had written with her own hands. As the stars came out, she looked up. The sky stretched wide and endless above them, the same sky that had watched her sleep alone, fight the current, carry a boy, and face a tyrant. It held all the pieces of who she had been, and welcomed who she had become. She smiled faintly into the fire, and for the first time in years the world felt whole.